Okay, today we're going to look at solving fractional equations. So the last several days we've been solving all different kinds of equations with variables on both sides and combining like terms and using your distributive property. But today we're going to be looking at fractional equations in which we have fractions in the equations. Now, I'm not talking about equations where we just have to add or subtract a fraction in order to get the variable by itself. What I'm talking about is the variable is going to be in the numerator, and we have multiple fractions, so we're not just going to be able to combine like terms. So when we solve a fractional equation, what our goal is to get rid of the denominator. Remember, division or fractions means division, and in order to get rid of the division, you need to multiply. So what you're going to do is you're going to multiply every single term in the equation by the least common multiple, or another way to look at it is by the common denominator. So we got to go back to middle school days and think about what common denominators are. Common denominator is the least common multiple for any given numbers. Once we multiply each term by the least common multiple, we're able to reduce the fractions then, and we're going to be left with a nice, easy equation to solve. We are going to justify our steps for the first couple problems. Okay, but before we get started, I want to show you, in case you're not good with finding the least common multiple, I want to show you how to do it on the graphing calculator. Now, if I want to find the least common multiple between 3 and 4, okay, now hopefully you're looking at that and you're already thinking to yourself, well, I know what the answer is. If I know my multiples of 3 and my multiples of 4, I can find the least common multiple. But those of you that are not good with your math facts, you can use your graphing calculator. If you press the math button and you go over to number, so scroll to the right, and you scroll down until you see LCM. LCM stands for least common multiple. Hit enter, and then do 3, comma, which is right above the 7 key, and 4, and then close the parentheses. And the graphing calculator tells us that the least common multiple is 12. So while we're solving these equations, if you're really struggling with what the least common multiple is, you can use your calculator to figure it out. I've listed the steps on the graphing calculator on the notes here. Okay, so let's take a look at the first example. I have x over 3 plus x over 5 equals 8. What I want you to notice is I don't have any like terms that I can combine. I can't combine those two fractions together unless I have a common denominator. So that's exactly what I'm going to look for. I'm going to look for the common denominator, or least common multiple, between 3 and 5. Now, the least common multiple between 3 and 5 is 15. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply every single term in this equation by 15. I'm just going to rewrite it right below so I have a little bit of room. And I'm going to multiply the x over 3 by 15. Notice how my 15 is up towards the numerator. I can write it as 15 over 1, but I'm not going to do that. And again, 15 times x over 5 for the second fraction. And every term gets multiplied by the least common multiple. Since I'm multiplying on both sides of the equation, I'm using my multiplication property of equality. Now, the reason that I multiply by the common denominator is so that I could reduce the fractions. Remember, this is like a 15 over 1. So I can say 15 divided by 3 is 5, and I leave that 5 up in the numerator. And then I can say 15 divided by 5 is 3, and I leave that 3 up in the numerator. So what I have now, 5 times x is 5x, plus 3 times x is 3x, equals, and then I have to do 15 times 8. There's no reducing to do there because I don't have any fractions on that side, and 15 times 8 is 120. So my justification is just that I simplified fractions. Okay, now I have a nice easy equation to solve. I've got x's on the same side, so I'm going to combine them together. And my justification is combine like terms. And then I divide both sides by 8, which is my division property of equality. And I'm left with x is equal to 15. Okay, so your goal when you're looking at fractional equations is to multiply every term in the problem by the LCM, by the least common multiple. Okay, next page. Now we're just going to do a bunch of examples with fractional equations. Remember, your goal is to find the least common multiple and then multiply every term. So I'm just going to write off to the side here for A, the common denominator, which is the same thing as the least common multiple for the denominators. Now there's only two denominators there, they're both 4s, so my common denominator is a 4. So I'm going to multiply, and again, I'm just going to rewrite it underneath because it's a little bit neater that way. I'm going to multiply every single part of the fractions, or I'm sorry, of the equation by 4. Notice I'm keeping the 4 up in the numerator because it's like 4 over 1. Once I do that, I'm going to reduce. 4 divided by 4 is 1. I can't reduce anything with the 4 and 20 because there's no denominator, there's no division to reduce it with. And then over here, 4 divided by 4 is again 1. So now I have, at the beginning, 1 times 3x is 3x, equals 4 times 20, which is 80, plus 1 times x, which is x. And again, I have a nice, easy equation that I can solve. I'm going to subtract x on both sides, and then divide both sides by 2, so x is equal to 40. Okay, now I'm going to do part B. Part B is a little bit different because we've got some multiple terms up in the numerators there, but the process is still the same. I've got all these fractions and I want to get rid of the fractions. So my common denominator between 6 and 10, some of you might be thinking 60, which is fine, but that's not the least common multiple. The least common multiple between 10 and 6 is actually 30. So again, I'm going to rewrite the equation underneath so I just have a little bit more room to multiply everybody by 30. Again, notice that the 30 is up in the numerator because it's like 30 over 1, and 3 gets multiplied by 30. Now, my next step is to reduce. Remember, we're reducing the fractions. We're getting rid of them. 30 goes into 6 5 times. 30 goes into 10 3 times. And I'm not going to reduce anything with the 3 times 30 because there's no division to reduce it with. But what I want you to notice is I'm multiplying that 5 in the beginning times the whole numerator, 2x plus 7, which means I'm going to have to use my distributive property. And then in the second fraction, it's the same thing. I'm multiplying the negative 3 times the entire numerator, 2x plus 9. And then 3 times 30 is 90. Now, I want you to, on the video, press pause. I want you to finish up the equation and see if you can get the correct answer. I will give you a hint that the correct answer is not an integer value. When you come back to the video, I will have the problem complete. Okay, so I actually messed with you a little bit. The answer was a nice integer answer. My answer key happened to be wrong. So what I did was I distributed, and I got 10x plus 35 minus 6x plus 27, because you're distributing a negative, equals 90. And we combine like terms to get 4x plus 62 equals 90. Subtract 62 on both sides. We get 4x equals 28. Divide by 4, and I get x equals 7. Okay, for part C, we're going to do the same exact thing, except this time I want you to try it. I want, again, you to press pause on the video, see if you can find your common denominator by yourself, multiply both sides by that common denominator, reduce, and then solve your equation. When you come back to the video, I will have it complete. Okay, so I found my common denominator for part C was 15, and I multiplied both fractions by the 15. Then I reduced 15 and 3 and got 5, and I reduced on the other side 15 and 5 and got 3. And then remember, since I'm multiplying by many terms in the numerator, I'm going to have to use my distributive property to get 10x plus 5. And on the right-hand side, I'm also going to have to use my distributive property to get 18 minus 27. Then we just have an equation when we have the variables on both sides, and we solve by getting all the x's on one side, the numbers on the other, and we end up with x is equal to 4. Okay, so part D, I want you guys again to do the same thing. I don't want you to be frustrated with the fact that the x's are after the fractions, because remember, the x can be after the fraction, at the bar, or higher. So just because the x's are after the fraction doesn't change the process at all. We're still going to multiply by the common denominator, still going to reduce your fractions, and solve your equation at the end. So go ahead and again press pause when you come back to the video. I'll have this one complete. Okay, for part D, my common denominator was 12. So I multiplied every single part of the fraction by 12. Then I reduced 12 goes into 4 goes into 12 3 times. And 12 divided by 3 is 4. And then again, I don't do any reducing with the 12 times 10 because there's no fraction to reduce it with. So now I multiplied 3 times 3x and got 9x. And then I multiplied 4 times x and got 4x is equal to 120. And then just combine my like terms and finish solving the equation. Now these equations, it's really important that you check. You might want to check these equations because you're going to be absolutely certain whether or not you get the question right. Okay, same thing for E and F. Again, I want you to try these on your own. You can try both of them at the same time and see if you can get the correct answers. And then when you come back to the video, I'll have both of these questions solved. Okay, for part E, my common denominator was 20. So I multiplied every part of the equation by 20. And then I reduced. 20 divided by 5 is 4. 20 divided by 4 is 5, and again, not reducing anything on the right-hand side because there's no fractions. And what I was left with was 4 times 2b, which is 8b, and 5 times 3b, which is 15b, equals 60. And then I combine my like terms to get 23b equals 60. Dividing both sides by 23, my final answer is 60 over 23. Remember, don't give me decimal answers. Always change your answers into fractions. Except F, I didn't change it into a fraction because 0.5 is a nice decimal. We didn't really have to worry about that. Now with F, I kind of tricked you a little bit because even though there's a fraction in this equation, I didn't have to multiply by the common denominator. I have that fraction right next to parentheses, so I was able to use my distributive property. 2/3 times C is 2/3 C, and then 2/3 times negative 18 is negative 12, equals 7. And then I have an equation like I gave you a few days ago where we just have to add the 12 to both sides and multiply by the reciprocal or divide both sides by 2/3. Either way, your answer is going to be C equals 28.5.